Barack Obama laughs at her faith, but what happens next will shock you. With one calm, live Bible quote, she silences the entire room. The laughter vanishes. Eyes widen. Even Obama is stunned. You won't believe how one simple statement changed everything. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Now let's dive into what really happened. The room was full, every seat taken, every camera rolling, every face wearing the kind of polite smile you see at high-profile events where nothing is supposed to go wrong. This was meant to be an easy moment, a smooth conversation, a controlled setting, the kind of environment where words are measured, reactions are predictable, and surprises are rare. But no one in that room was prepared for what happened next. It started innocently enough. A light exchange, a calm tone, a familiar rhythm that everyone recognized, the confidence, the charisma, the effortless presence of Barack Obama. When he laughed, it didn't feel sharp or cruel. It felt relaxed, almost automatic. The kind of laugh that signals comfort, authority, and ease. Some people smiled along. Others didn't think much of it at all. At first, it seemed harmless. Then Karoline spoke. She didn't rush her words. She didn't push herself forward. She didn't interrupt the moment or demand attention. Instead, she stood there quietly, composed, grounded, unshaken. There was no anger in her posture, no defensiveness in her tone. Just calm, and in her hands, she carried something far more powerful than a clever response or a sharp remark. She carried her faith. When the conversation touched on belief, values, and personal convictions, Obama's expression shifted just slightly, followed by a soft chuckle. Not loud, not mocking, but noticeable. To some, it felt insignificant. To others, it felt familiar. That subtle laugh, the kind people often brush off, landed heavier than expected. For anyone who has ever felt their deeply held beliefs quietly dismissed, that moment carried weight. And Karoline felt it. The room waited. This was the point where most people would react emotionally, defend themselves, push back, or shrink away. This was where tension usually turns into argument. But Karoline did something different. She didn't argue. She didn't correct him. She didn't raise her voice or sharpen her words. Instead, she paused, just long enough for the room to notice, just long enough for the energy to shift. And then she spoke, slowly, deliberately, with a calm confidence that demanded attention without asking for it. Because Karoline wasn't preparing a comeback. She was preparing to quote the Bible, live, in that room, in that moment. You could feel it before she even spoke the words. The air changed. People leaned forward slightly, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. Smiles faded. Background noise softened. Even the cameras seemed to hold still. This wasn't confrontation. This was conviction. And as Karoline began to speak, it became clear that this moment would not be forgotten. What had started as a casual laugh was now transforming into something much bigger, something reflective, serious, and deeply human. Within seconds, the laughter that once filled the room disappeared. In its place came silence. Not awkward silence. Not uncomfortable silence. But the kind of silence that means people are listening. Because no one had seen this coming. And no one was ready for what Karoline was about to say next. Karoline isn't a celebrity. She didn't walk into that room surrounded by assistants or flashing cameras, waiting just for her. She isn't a household name. She doesn't command headlines or dominate social media feeds. And that's exactly why this moment mattered so much. Karoline represents something far more powerful than fame, an everyday voice placed in an extraordinary situation. She is the kind of person most people recognize themselves in. Someone who carries strong personal values, but doesn't feel the need to announce them loudly. Someone who listens more than she speaks, and when she does speak, chooses her words carefully. Those who know her describe her as steady, calm, grounded, not passive, but intentional. Karoline has never been interested in dominating rooms or winning applause. She doesn't chase attention or seek validation from others. Instead, she speaks with a quiet conviction, the kind that doesn't need volume to be heard. And in a world that often rewards the loudest voice, that kind of presence stands out. When the conversation turned toward faith, It wasn't treated with hostility. There was no direct attack, no aggressive pushback. Instead, it was brushed aside lightly, framed as something outdated, maybe even a little naive. Then came the laugh. It was subtle, quick, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Not cruel, not harsh, but unmistakably dismissive. For many people in the audience, that small moment carried a familiar sting, because they'd felt it before. That quiet dismissal of something deeply personal. That unspoken message that belief, especially faith, is something to be politely tolerated, not taken seriously. And Karoline noticed it. She didn't flinch. She didn't tighten her jaw. She didn't roll her eyes or look away. But inside, something shifted. Because this wasn't about politics. It wasn't about ideology. It wasn't even about the speaker on stage. It was about respect. And Karoline understood that moments like this are crossroads. You either react emotionally or you respond with purpose. She chose purpose. Instead of letting the moment pass or letting emotion take control, Karoline grounded herself. She took a breath, a real one, the kind you take when you know what you're about to say matters. She looked forward, not at one person, but at the room itself, at the audience, at the cameras, at everyone listening. And in that moment, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for countless people who have felt their beliefs quietly minimized. For those who were told, without words, that faith is something to be laughed at, not understood. Her choice wasn't confrontation. It was clarity. Karoline didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse anyone of disrespect. She didn't demand agreement. She chose something stronger. She chose to speak truth, calmly, clearly, and without fear. And that decision changed the tone of the entire room. What had been casual suddenly became serious. What had been light became reflective, and what had felt dismissive turned into something far more thoughtful. This wasn't just a moment about Karoline. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful voices aren't the loudest, they're the most grounded. And as she prepared to speak, the room sensed it. Something meaningful was about to happen. Karoline didn't raise her voice. There was no sharp tone, no sudden movement, no attempt to seize control of the room. She didn't point fingers. She didn't single anyone out. She didn't accuse, challenge, or provoke. Instead, she did something unexpected. She paused, just long enough for the room to quiet down. And then, in a steady voice, she said something simple yet powerful. "Let me share something I live by." Those words alone changed the atmosphere. They weren't confrontational. They weren't defensive. They carried sincerity, the kind that immediately disarms tension. And then she quoted the Bible. Not hurried, not dramatic, but slowly, clearly, and with purpose. Each word was intentional. Each phrase delivered with care. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a sermon. It was a reflection of something deeply personal, spoken aloud in a space where few expected it. The words she chose weren't sharp or condemning. They weren't aimed at anyone in particular. They didn't shame. They didn't lecture. Instead, they spoke about humility, about wisdom, about the importance of not mocking what others hold sacred. And as those words filled the room, something remarkable happened. The laughter disappeared. Not abruptly, but completely. You could see it in real time. Smiles faded. Postures shifted. People leaned forward slightly, as if pulled in by the weight of what they were hearing. Eyes widened, not in shock, but in recognition. Even the air felt different. What had once been light and casual now felt still, focused, almost reverent. Conversations didn't whisper. Chairs didn't move. No one reached for their phone. Because this wasn't a debate anymore. This wasn't a clash of opinions. It was a moment of reflection. Karoline wasn't asking anyone to agree with her. She wasn't demanding respect. She was embodying it. As the final words of the verse settled, all eyes drifted back toward the stage. Obama's expression had changed. There was no defensiveness, no irritation, no sign of offense. Instead, there was something quieter, something more human, thoughtfulness. For a brief moment, the confidence and ease gave way to contemplation. He wasn't reacting as a politician, or a public figure. He was reacting as a listener. And that was a turning point. Because for the first time in that room, people weren't responding to personality or power. They weren't watching a famous figure speak or waiting for a clever reply. They were responding to truth spoken with calm confidence. And that's what stunned everyone. Not the verse itself, but the way it was delivered, without anger, without arrogance, without fear. Karoline didn't silence the room. She invited it to listen. And in doing so, she reminded everyone present that conviction doesn't need volume to be powerful. It only needs authenticity. The moment passed quietly, but its impact lingered. Because long after the words were spoken, the silence that followed said everything. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It wasn't the kind of silence that makes people shift in their seats or nervously clear their throats. It was heavy. The kind of silence that settles over a room when something real has just happened. Something unexpected. Something meaningful. The kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled, because everyone knows it deserves to be felt. Moments like this don't happen often, especially not in public spaces where debates usually turn loud, defensive, and performative, where disagreement is met with volume instead of understanding. But this moment was different. Karoline didn't respond to subtle disrespect with anger. She didn't fire back with sarcasm. She didn't match laughter with outrage. She answered it with grace. And that's why the room went quiet. Karoline wasn't trying to win anything. She wasn't trying to score points or dominate the narrative. She wasn't interested in embarrassing anyone on stage. Instead, she reminded everyone of something deeper, something many people forget in conversations like this, that for millions of people around the world, faith isn't a joke. It isn't a trend. It isn't something to be casually dismissed. It's a foundation. It shapes how people live, how they treat others, how they make sense of suffering, hope, failure, and forgiveness. And when something that meaningful is brushed aside, even subtly, it leaves a mark. The crowd began to understand that this moment had nothing to do with sides. This wasn't Obama versus Karoline. It wasn't left versus right. It wasn't belief versus disbelief. It wasn't politics at all. It was about respect. And once that realization set in, the atmosphere shifted even more. Some people in the audience nodded quietly, not dramatically, not for attention, but in recognition, as if they were thinking, yes, that's exactly it. Others looked uncomfortable, not because anyone had attacked them, but because moments of truth have a way of holding up mirrors. And not everyone likes what they see reflected back. A few people smiled, not because the moment was amusing, but because it was powerful, because it showed something rare, restraint paired with conviction, strength expressed without force. In that moment, Karoline stopped being just one person on stage. She became a symbol. She represented every person who has ever felt talked down to for believing in something greater than themselves. Every person who stayed quiet when their values were brushed aside. Every person who chose dignity over defensiveness. And she did it without raising her voice. That's what made the silence so profound. No one felt attacked. No one felt shouted down. No one felt humiliated. Yet everyone felt something. And that's why the crowd didn't rush to respond. They didn't interrupt the moment with applause. They didn't break it with noise. They let it breathe, because sometimes the most powerful response isn't a reaction at all. It's reflection. And in that stillness, the message landed. This wasn't a viral clash filled with shouting. There were no raised voices, no insults traded back and forth, no dramatic walk-offs or explosive reactions designed for quick clicks. Instead, this moment stood out because it was something far more rare. It was strength without aggression, faith without force, confidence without arrogance. In a world where attention is often won by being louder, angrier, or more extreme, Karoline chose a different path. She didn't try to silence anyone. She invited reflection. And that choice is exactly why the moment landed so deeply. Nothing was taken from anyone in that room, but something was added. Perspective. The laughter that once filled the space slowly faded into the background. In its place came something quieter, more human, awareness. Not embarrassment. Not defensiveness. Just a subtle recognition that a line had been crossed, and then thoughtfully addressed. For Obama, the moment passed without drama. No argument followed. No tension escalated. But something shifted, the kind of shift that doesn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. And for those watching later, this moment resonates for a simple reason. It reminds people of something important. You don't need power to stand firm. You don't need status to speak with authority. You don't need a microphone to hold your ground. Sometimes all it takes is a calm voice, a steady presence, and words that have stood the test of time. Karoline didn't demand respect. She modeled it, and that made her message impossible to ignore. People didn't feel pressured to agree. They felt invited to think. That's why the crowd didn't erupt in applause. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap wildly. They didn't try to break the moment with noise. They did something far more meaningful. They listened, and in that listening, the message settled deeper than any reaction ever could, because moments built on shouting fade quickly. They burn bright and disappear just as fast. But moments built on grace linger. They stay with people long after the room empties and the cameras turn off. This wasn't just a scene caught on video. It was a reminder. That belief can be expressed without hostility. That disagreement doesn't require disrespect. That quiet conviction can be just as powerful as the loudest voice in the room. And that's why this moment didn't just stun the crowd. It stayed with them. Long after the laughter ended. Long after the words were spoken. Long after the room fell silent. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones that make everyone stop and truly listen.